My husband walked in, kissing his mistress, not knowing I'd filled the house with our whole family for the surprise party I'd spent a month building for him. My husband got the promotion he'd chased for 9 years, and for a month, I treated it like a mission. He'd grown up being told by his own father that he'd never amount to anything. So becoming regional director wasn't just a title to him, it was proof, the thing he'd been trying to earn since he was a boy. So I planned a surprise at our house, called in family, booked his mother's flight, and spent the whole day pretending my hands weren't shaking. By nightfall, the living room was dark and holding its breath. I thought the worst thing that could go wrong was someone knocking over the champagne tower. I was wrong. My name is Ria, and I'm telling you this the way I'd tell a close friend on the phone at midnight, because the polished version of this story makes me feel like I'm lying to you. I was in my early 30s, and I'd spent most of my adult life learning how to make myself smaller around a man who took up all the room in every space he entered. We lived in the house his grandfather left behind, the one that ended up in his mother's name after all the paperwork settled. So day to day, it felt like hours, even though on paper, it never once was. That little detail is going to matter later, unfortunately. I planned this party the way people plan a tiny wedding they keep swearing they aren't planning. I had lists on my phone, sticky notes stuck to the inside of the pantry door, reminders that buzzed at the most inconvenient times, usually while I was mid-conversation with him and had to slap my phone face down like a criminal. I made a guest list that was mostly family and a few close friends, the people we always saw around the holidays, the people who still picked up when he called even after he'd been short with them for weeks. I asked a friend who plays guitar to come do some quiet background music, and then I panicked about it for 2 days because I hate being the center of anything. And apparently, I'd married a man who considered attention his natural habitat. I ordered decorations from one of those generic party sites. Nothing fancy, just warm string lights and a banner and balloons in the deep blue he liked. I picked the cake after scrolling through so many photos that I started dreaming in buttercream. The biggest thing, the thing I was quietly proud of, was getting his mother to come. She lived 2 states away, and traveling was, in her words, a whole ordeal. Not because she couldn't do it, but because she always made it sound like the universe had personally insulted her by requiring airports and shoes. She and I got along in this tense, careful way, like 2 people carrying a full soup pot between them, both silently praying the other one wouldn't trip. Still, I called her. I arranged her flight. I found someone to pick her up from the airport, and every time she sighed down the phone, I swallowed it, because I wanted my husband to have his mom in the room when he finally got the thing his father said he never would. Also, honestly, because I was raised to keep the peace, and I'm still unlearning that one swallowed sigh at a time. The morning of the party, I acted like it was just another Saturday. Over coffee, I mentioned I might swing by my parents' place that evening. Casual, like I hadn't spent the previous night hiding 40 balloons and a case of champagne behind the winter coats in the spare closet. My husband barely glanced up from his phone. He made this little sound, not really a reply, just a low hum that meant, sure, whatever. And I told myself he was distracted because work had been so intense lately. He'd been staying late for weeks, coming home smelling like office air conditioning and energy drinks, always saying he was under pressure with the promotion decision coming down soon. I believed him because it fit the story I wanted to be living in. Before all of this, if you'd asked me to describe our marriage, I'd have said fine, in the way people say fine when they don't want to look too closely at anything. By then, we'd been married 9 years, long enough that people assumed we were solid, even when the truth was we were just well-rehearsed. We weren't one of those couples who fought loudly in restaurants or posted syrupy anniversary paragraphs online, but we weren't warm either. He liked routine. He liked control. He liked things that made him look, from the outside, like a man who had it all handled. I loved him, but I also spent years editing myself around his moods, believing that if I used the right tone at the right moment, I could keep everything smooth. Spoiler, you cannot keep the peace with someone who treats peace like a prize. You have to keep re-earning. When we first got married, I thought partnership meant shared dreams. He treated it like shared access. It started small, little questions about what I'd bought, jokes about my spending that weren't really jokes, a suggestion that we combine all our accounts to make budgeting simpler. Then it quietly stopped being a suggestion. He started reviewing statements, calling my choices impulsive, framing any pushback as me being irresponsible with our future. So I shrank to keep things calm. I told myself it was just normal compromise, that marriage was work, that love meant adjusting. I hear now how practiced that all sounds. A few years in, he got more intense about proving himself, about the promotion, about not ending up, in his words, ordinary. His father had spent his whole childhood telling him he was soft, that he'd never lead anything. And even after his father passed, my husband kept arguing with a dead man he could never win against. That's around when the temporary idea showed up. He said if I quit my job and ran the house, He could focus, climb faster, land the director role, and then we'd both be set. He made it sound like we were both sacrificing for a shared future, but really it was me sacrificing so his life could feel bigger. I said I'd do it for a year. Then it became just until this restructuring finishes. Then it became we can't afford for you to start over right now. Except there were no kids. No real reason. There was just me at home, trying to make my own life quieter so his could feel louder. And look, I'm not going to pretend I was some flawless victim. I got resentful. I got snippy. I got clingy in ways that embarrassed me even while I was doing them. I'd ask him to come home earlier and then hate myself the second the words left my mouth for sounding needy. I'd pick fights about nothing because I didn't know how to say the enormous things without crying. Some afternoons I'd deep clean the entire house like an anxious raccoon, and then when he walked in and didn't notice, I'd get this wild urge to fling a sponge at the back of his head. I never did, but the urge lived in me, rent-free. The year leading up to the party, he changed. Not just stressed, different. He started caring about how he looked in a way he hadn't before. New shirts, a different cologne I didn't recognize, suddenly remembering to book haircuts. He started taking calls out on the back porch with the door shut. He'd tilt his phone away from me like it was pure instinct. If I asked who he was texting, he'd say, "Work," a half second too fast, like a kid caught with his hand in something. Once I caught a glimpse of his screen and saw a little heart next to a name I didn't know, and when I asked, he laughed and said it was an inside joke from the office. I wanted to believe that so badly that I made myself laugh along with him. The worst part is that I did have the feeling, that quiet, sick, low feeling. But every time it surfaced, I talked myself back down because confronting him meant risking the entire life I'd built around him. And I wasn't ready to admit I'd built my whole stability on top of a person who could yank it out from under me whenever he wanted. By late afternoon, our house looked like it had swallowed a celebration whole. I pushed furniture against the walls, I set out trays of food, I lined up drinks along the kitchen counter, and I kept checking my phone like it was going to betray me at any second by flashing surprise ruined across the screen. People started arriving around 6, slipping in quietly, whispering and grinning, doing that thing adults do where they try to be stealthy and somehow become 3 times louder. Someone's kid dropped a toy car, and the clatter sounded like a gunshot in the hush. Everyone froze, then laughed way too hard. My heart was doing this ridiculous sprinting thing, like it wanted top billing. We turned off the lights and waited. The house filled up with that strange, dark, full of bodies holding their breath silence, the kind where you can hear someone's stomach growl from across the room. I stood near the entryway, my fingers sticky because I'd tried to fix a tiny smudge on the cake's edge and had, of course, made it worse. And I kept picturing my husband's face when he walked in and saw everyone. I pictured him smiling, maybe even getting a little misty, this proud man finally being celebrated by the people who loved him for a thing his father swore he'd never do. And for one warm second, I let myself imagine that the next year of our marriage would be lighter, softer, like we were finally turning some corner together. I was adorable. I genuinely want to reach back in time and slap past me. The garage door rumbled and my whole body pulled tight, like a string wound too far. I heard a car door shut. I heard voices, muffled, close, and a laugh that wasn't his. The front door swung open, and everyone leapt out of hiding and shouted, "Surprise!" And the lights snapped on like a spotlight hitting a stage. And there he was, swaying a little, tie loose, collar undone, looking like he'd spent the last hour losing a slow fight with gravity. Later, he would swear he thought I was at my parents', that he was too drunk to think straight, that she was the one who kept whispering, "Just go in. It's fine. Nobody's home." His arm was wrapped around a woman I didn't know well enough to call anything except the woman. Except I did know her, technically, because she worked under him, a junior analyst on his team. She had that younger, polished look, hair perfect, makeup intact, like she'd never once cried into a bathroom mirror, wondering how her life had gotten so small. And they were kissing. Not a peck, not a stumble. A full, unhurried, confident kiss, like the whole world belonged to the two of them, and no one else existed. The sound that filled the room wasn't a scream or a gasp. It was silence. The kind of silence that has weight, that lands on you. Someone coughed. Someone started a laugh out of pure nerves and choked it into an awkward wheeze. I saw his mother in the crowd, her hand flying up over her mouth, her eyes going wide in a way that made her look suddenly much older. I saw our friends, people we'd had dinner with, people who'd helped us carry a couch up the stairs, staring like they'd all been slapped at once. I saw my own hand, still holding the serving knife I'd picked up to cut the cake, and for a second I understood why people say they saw red. Don't worry, I didn't. I'm dramatic, not unhinged. My husband pulled back first, blinking like he'd just remembered gravity was a rule. The woman's lipstick was smeared, her smile flickering as she realized this wasn't some private moment she got to control. His eyes swept the room, confused, and then they landed on his mother, and his whole face did this awful shift, like surprise, curdling straight into annoyance, like we'd all caught him doing something mildly embarrassing that he now had to manage. His mother stood up so fast her chair scraped across the floor. "What is this?" she said, not really a question, more like a verdict being read. "What are you doing?" My husband exhaled through his nose, the way he did when I asked him to take out the trash. He looked at me, and for one stupid second, I thought he was about to say something human, some version of, "Oh God, what have I done?" Instead, he said, "Well, this is awkward." The woman tried to smooth down her dress, her eyes darting around the room, and I noticed she was clutching her purse to her stomach like a shield. My husband's hand stayed on her waist, protective, almost proud. The humiliation hit me so hard it turned physical, heat crawling up my neck and into my ears. I heard my own voice before I'd fully decided to use it. "Why is she here?" My voice came out steadier than I felt, which honestly was a small miracle, because on the inside, I was a blender running at full speed. "Why would you bring her into our house?" He blinked at me. "I didn't plan this," he said, like that was the crime being discussed. "No," I snapped. "I did." And a couple of people actually winced at how flat it came out. "I planned your party. I planned your mother's flight. I picked out the cake. I planned every single detail because I thought this was going to be the best night of your life." He looked past me, at the string lights, the food, the banner with his name on it, and then back at me. And I swear to you, he looked irritated, like my month of effort was an inconvenience sitting between him and the door. Then he did the thing that broke whatever last piece of me still wanted to believe this could somehow be fixed. He shrugged, and he said, "I'm tired of pretending." I heard a few people suck in a breath. His mother made a sound like she couldn't decide whether to cry or start yelling. And my husband kept going, because once he started, it was like a speech he'd already rehearsed in his head, the kind that lets a person feel righteous while they set fire to someone in front of a crowd. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," he said, words slow and thick with alcohol and this terrible confidence. "My whole life I've been chasing something to make me feel like enough. I finally got it today. And I looked at all of it and realized I don't want to spend the rest of my life in something that makes me feel like I'm suffocating. I'm not doing it anymore." I stared at him. "So you got your promotion this afternoon," I said, and my laugh came out sharp, almost a bark. "And you decided the reward was cheating on me in front of your mother?" He rolled his eyes. "I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm just choosing what feels real." The woman beside him lifted her chin, like she was proud to be his real thing. She looked at me with this tiny smile that wasn't even a little sorry. His mother took a trembling step forward. "You are humiliating your wife," she said, "in front of everyone, in my husband's house." My husband's jaw tightened. "It's not your house," he said automatically, and then caught himself because people were watching, and corrected it into, "I mean, it's family. It's mine too." His mother's eyes narrowed, and I saw something in her shift. Something quiet and dangerous. But I didn't have the space to process it, because my brain had locked onto one impossible fact. He was confessing to an affair in front of our friends and treating it like an act of bravery, like he was the tragic hero escaping a boring marriage, and I was the boring. I felt my hands move before my dignity could catch them. I picked up the cake. The whole cake. 2 hands, careful, heavy, the frosting soft under my fingers. There was one clear moment where my brain screamed, "Don't," and my anger screamed, "Do it louder," and I did it. I shoved the cake forward, straight into his chest and his face, and the frosting burst outward like an absurd sugary bomb. It got in his hair, down his shirt, across one cheek. It caught the woman too, mostly her shoulder and the side of her dress. Someone in the back let out one shocked bark of a laugh and immediately slapped a hand over their mouth. I can't even blame them. It looked ridiculous. It was ridiculous. Apparently that was my marriage. My husband wiped frosting out of his eyes and roared, "What is wrong with you?" I stood there breathing hard. "What's wrong with me?" I repeated, my voice shaking now. "You just kissed your mistress in front of your mother, and you want to ask me what's wrong with me." His mother said the woman's name quietly, like she couldn't believe the syllables were leaving her mouth. The woman's face went red, and not from the cake, from being seen. She tried to step back, but my husband pulled her in close again. "Don't call her that." He snapped at his own mother, like she was the one being rude. And that's when his mother's voice went cold in a way I'd never heard from her. "Go upstairs," she told him. "Clean yourself up, and then you're going to explain to me why you thought you could bring this into the house your grandfather left behind." My husband looked like he wanted to argue, but he also looked embarrassed. and embarrassment has always been his least favorite feeling in the world, so he stormed up the stairs. The woman stood there with frosting sliding slowly down her arm, her eyes huge, and the whole room felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been written. I walked toward her without deciding to. My feet felt heavy, my face burning. I took hold of her arm, not gently, and started pulling her toward the door. "Out," I said. She yanked her arm back. "Don't touch me," she snapped, like she had rights in my living room. "You can't just put your hands on me." His mother stepped up beside me fast. "You have some nerve," she said to the woman, her voice climbing. "Coming here, walking into this family's home." The woman's eyes flicked over her, then back to me, and her mouth curled up at the corner. "Maybe he brought me because he actually wants me," she said, and the words landed like a slap. "Maybe he's just tired of," and she glanced around at the decorations, the ruined cake, the frozen guests, whatever all of this is. I felt my whole body go hot. My stomach flipped over. "Whatever this is," I repeated, laughing with absolutely no humor in it. "You mean the marriage you've been sleeping your way through?" She shrugged. "And this is the part that still makes my blood boil when I remember it." She shrugged at me like I was a sad stranger she'd bumped into at a bus stop. "He chose me," she said. "You can act as crazy as you want. He's still leaving you." I don't remember deciding to slap her. I remember my hand already moving, the sharp crack of it in the doorway, the way her head turned and her eyes went enormous. The room erupted into noise, not cheering, not shouting, just chaos. Everyone talking over everyone. Someone saying my name like naming me would stop me. His mother actually lurched forward like she might do something worse, then caught herself, breathing hard, hands shaking at her sides. The woman pressed a hand to her cheek and hissed, "I'm going to sue you." She threatened to call the police right then, loud enough for the whole room to hear. But she didn't actually do it. I think even in that moment, she understood exactly what would happen if officers showed up and started asking questions, statements, and a full public explanation of why my husband's junior analyst was standing in his mother's doorway with cake on her dress. She wanted leverage, not a spotlight. His mother laughed, short and bitter. "Good luck with that," she said. "You'll need it." My husband stomped back down in a fresh shirt, his hair damp from the sink, his face red with fury. He took one look at the woman holding her cheek and snapped into protective mode, like she was the only wounded person in the room. "You hit her," he shouted at me. "I did," I said, and the calm in my own voice surprised even me. "She called my marriage whatever this is in my own doorway." He jabbed a finger at me like I was a dangerous stranger. "You're unstable," he said, loud enough for everyone. "This is exactly why I'm done. This is what I've been dealing with." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something else. I wanted to reach back through 9 years and never marry him in the first place. Instead, I just stood there, frosting in my hair, cake crumbs down my shirt, and I understood all at once that he was doing this on purpose. He was building a story right in front of everyone, one where I was the problem and he was the brave man finally escaping. His mother turned to him, her voice trembling. "You waited until the one night your whole family was in this room," she said. "You did this on purpose. You wanted an audience." My husband's jaw went hard. "Don't," he said. "Then stop pretending this is about anything but you," she shot back. The woman tugged on my husband's sleeve and whispered something, and he nodded like she was the one calling the shots. Then he surprised me by walking over to the base of the stairs and grabbing a duffel bag I hadn't seen before. One he must have packed and left in the car, then carried in at some point because it was already zipped and waiting. He slung it over his shoulder like a man catching a flight, not a husband leaving his wife. "I'm not staying here tonight," he said, and he said it like he was doing me a favor. "We'll talk when you've calmed down." I laughed again, because what else do you do when the person who just torched your life in front of everyone you know tells you to calm down? "Don't worry," I said, low. "I'll be calm. I'll be calm in a way you have never once seen from me." His mother stepped between us, and for the first time all night, she looked directly at me, really looked, like she was finally seeing me. "Everyone needs to go home now," she told the guests, loud, polite, shaking. "Thank you all for coming. I'm so sorry. Please just go." People left in a slow wave of awkwardness, murmuring apologies, touching my arm on their way past like I was made of glass. My friend with the guitar hovered near the wall, case half open, clearly having no idea whether to disappear or play something. And then he slipped out too, eyes down, like none of us could blame him for wanting to pretend he hadn't seen any of it. After the last car pulled out of the driveway, my phone started buzzing like it had a personal grudge against me. Messages, missed calls, people sending "Are you okay?" as if that question meant anything when your life had just been split open in your own doorway. I barely slept. I lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, replaying the light snapping on, the kiss, the faces, my own hands driving cake into his chest like it was the only language my body had left. The next morning, I woke up hollow, like my brain was still standing in that entryway. My hair smelled like sugar. The living room smelled like flat champagne and disaster. Balloons had drifted into the corners overnight and settled there like little bright ghosts. I tried calling my own mother because apparently I still default to call mom in a crisis, even though my mother and I have never had that soft, comforting kind of relationship. She picked up on the second ring and I told her, choking on the words, "He cheated. He brought her here." In front of everyone. There was a pause. And then my mother sighed, like I just told her the car needed an oil change. "Well," she said, "you shouldn't have embarrassed him like that." I stared at the wall. "I embarrassed him," I whispered. "You threw a cake at the man," she said, like the affair was a footnote and the frosting was the headline. Men don't forgive that kind of scene. I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there in the quiet living room and realized something ugly and true. My marriage wasn't the only place I'd been trained to swallow my own feelings to keep other people comfortable. That was bigger than him. That was my whole life. The next day, my mother sent a long text about staying calm and not making rash decisions and honoring my vows, and I couldn't even read it without my hands shaking. I'd wanted her to be angry for me. I'd wanted her to say, "Pack his things. You deserve so much more than this." Instead, she acted like my job was to keep hold of a man who had already left. That's when I decided I was done asking for support from people who only offered it if I performed the right way first. I didn't tell his mother about that phone call. Not then. I kept it to myself for days, because I didn't want to poison the only real support I had with another reminder that even my own family would rather blame me than blame him. So I swallowed it again and pretended I was fine while the two of us stepped over balloon strings and scrubbed frosting off the walls. And the mess was genuinely unreal. Cake ground into the rug, smeared across the light switches, sticky footprints tracked through the hall because somebody had stepped in it and then walked around. I scrubbed and scrubbed because I needed something physical to do, something I could actually control. His mother kept grabbing fresh paper towels and muttering "unbelievable" under her breath, like she was trying to erase the whole night through sheer stubbornness. At one point, I found my husband's wedding band in the bathroom sink. I just stared at it, sitting there in a little puddle of water, and for half a second, I felt this sharp, stupid flicker of hope, like maybe he'd left it by accident and would come back for it, ashamed. Then I realized he'd probably taken it off before he even walked into the house, because rings have never once stopped a person who wants to cheat. I picked it up, dried it, and put it in a drawer. I didn't throw it out. I wasn't ready to be that final yet. That afternoon, his mother got a call from him, and she put it on speaker because she was done protecting him. He said he wanted to talk things out, and his voice had this calm, fake, reasonable tone, like he was walking through a contract. He said I needed to control myself and apologize for the assault, and my stomach twisted. Then he asked his mother when she was flying home, like he was just checking his own schedule. His mother stared at the phone like it was garbage and said, "I'm not leaving her alone." He got quiet, and then he said, "So you're choosing her?" "Yes," she said, so bluntly, I almost laughed. "I'm choosing the person who didn't set fire to this family in my living room." He hung up on her like a teenager, a grown man, a brand new regional director, hanging up on his mother because she wouldn't validate his betrayal. The next morning, his mother was already up when I dragged myself off the couch, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and that particular look she gets when she's decided something and is fully prepared for the world to argue with her about it. She slid a piece of paper across the table toward me. "It's a lease," she said. I stared at it. "A lease?" "A rental agreement," she corrected, like the wording mattered, and I would soon learn that with her, the wording always mattered. "You're going to be a tenant here. Officially, on paper. If he ever tries to claim you're trespassing, he can't. If he ever tries to have you thrown out, he can't." My hands shook as I read it, not because it was complicated, but because it was real. It was her turning a decision into something written down, something much harder to undo. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice cracking. "This is going to make him furious." She took a slow sip of coffee like she could drink his fury for breakfast. "Let him be furious," she said. "He's been comfortable for far too long." We drove to a small local office where a lawyer sat behind a desk and explained everything in plain terms, and I nodded like I was following, even though my brain kept drifting back to the image of my husband's cake-covered face. The lawyer asked me the basic questions: what I did for work, how long we'd been married, whether there were children, and every answer felt like reading out an inventory of my own life. When I admitted I wasn't working full-time anymore, he raised his eyebrows in that polite way people do when they're really thinking something less polite. "That's going to complicate things a little," he said. I got defensive, like I had to justify it, and blurted out, "It made sense at the time." He just nodded, like he'd heard that exact sentence 1,000 times before. He probably had. His mother kept jumping in to make the house history crystal clear because she wanted no confusion about who the property belonged to. She said it with that firm tone that doesn't leave room for debate, and I watched the lawyer's pen start moving faster, like he was thinking, All right, this part is clean. Before we left, he told me to document everything. Save the messages. Keep a timeline. The kind of advice that makes you feel like your own life has become a case file. I hated it. But I also knew my husband was exactly the type to rewrite a story if you gave him a quiet room to do it in. So I started. I made a folder on my laptop, dumped screenshots into it, wrote dates in a little notebook, not because I wanted drama, but because I no longer trusted him not to invent some. Back at the house, his mother insisted we change the locks, and for once, I didn't feel impulsive doing it, because the lawyer had told us to treat the house as exactly what it legally was, her property, not his entitlement. The lawyer drafted a simple written notice that his access was revoked, and that any communication about his belongings would go through counsel. Then we called a locksmith, a tired man who showed up, swapped out the locks, and didn't ask a single question, which I appreciated more than I can say. When he handed me the new keys, I gripped them too tightly, like metal could somehow keep me safe. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because I missed him, but because my brain kept looping the party like a highlight reel it refused to shut off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lights snapping on, the kiss, the frozen faces. I kept wondering what people were saying, whether they felt sorry for me or secretly thought I'd had it coming. I hated that I cared, but humiliation is a sticky thing. It clings to you. So I got up at 3 in the morning, opened my laptop, and started applying for jobs like my life depended on it. Because it did. I filled out applications in my pajamas with a mug of cold tea going colder beside me, typing out my old experience with shaking hands, trying to explain the gaps without sounding pathetic. I'd been out of my field long enough that my resume looked like it had gone into hibernation. I wanted to scream at him, "Look what you did," but he wasn't there, and that was exactly the point. He'd left me to clean up the consequences of choices he'd pushed me into for years. His mother found me at the table the next morning and just stood in the doorway watching me stare at the screen. "You don't have to fix everything overnight," she said gently. I laughed, exhausted. "If I don't, who will?" I said, and my voice cracked. "He won't. My parents won't. It's me." She came over and squeezed my shoulder. "Then we'll do it step by step," she said, and something in me loosened, just slightly. Not because everything was okay, but because for the first time, someone was standing next to me, saying, "You don't have to do this alone." Over the next couple of weeks, his mother and I packed his things. I expected to feel devastated, like I was erasing him from the house, but instead I felt this strange, steady focus. I got boxes from the garage. I folded his clothes with a kind of angry precision. I found random pieces of our life in his drawers, old receipts, ticket stubs, socks with no matches, and I packed all of it anyway. His mother worked beside me, quiet but present, and every so often she'd mutter something like, "Unbelievable," or "I did not raise him like this." And I could tell she was grieving too, not just for my marriage, but for the man she'd thought her son was. By the end of the weekend, the boxes were stacked along the front porch. His mother wanted it handled cleanly, so the lawyer sent a basic written notice. He had a short window to come collect his belongings. And after that, whatever happened to the boxes was on him. I checked the weather that night and saw rain in the forecast. A lot of it. I looked at the boxes and had one small human moment where I thought I should probably drag them under the awning because I'm not a monster. Then I remembered him calling me unstable in front of our friends, telling everyone I was the reason he cheated, and my kindness evaporated on the spot. So I left them. I left his whole life sitting out there in cardboard, like a warning. His mother arranged for a couple of simple security cameras to be installed. Nothing fancy, just enough to record if he decided to do something stupid. I hated that we even had to think that way. I hated even more that part of me fully expected him to. A week passed, then another, and in that time, my husband sent a scattering of messages that swung wildly between cold and dramatic. One minute it was, "We need to be adults about this." The next it was, "You've destroyed my life," as if he hadn't struck the match himself. The woman sent me exactly one message, a long one, dripping with self-righteousness and fake concern, like she was doing me a kindness by taking him off my hands. I didn't reply. I stared at it with my heart pounding, and then I blocked her. The day he came back, I was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by paperwork because I'd finally started the divorce process, and my fingers were stained with ink from filling out forms. The camera app on my phone pinged, and my stomach dropped before I even looked. There he was in the driveway, stepping out of the car like he still owned the ground under it. The woman beside him in sunglasses, arms crossed, going for unbothered. He walked up to the door and tried his old key. tried it again, harder, then yanked the knob like force would rewrite the locks. When it didn't work, he knocked. Polite at first, and then the knocks turned into pounding. I didn't move. I just watched through the camera, my heart slamming, and I realized something that steadied me. I didn't have to open the door. I didn't have to face him on his terms in my own home. I pressed the button to talk through the camera. "What are you doing?" I asked, and my voice came out calm, which was honestly the most satisfying part of the whole thing. He jerked his head up, startled by the sound of me coming out of the little speaker. "Open the door," he demanded. "This is ridiculous." "Why are you here?" I asked again, because I was stubborn and because I wanted him to say it out loud. He scoffed. "To get my things and to tell you that you need to be out by the end of the week. I've given you enough time." I laughed, not loud, just a short exhale. "You didn't give me anything," I said. "You left, remember? With your girlfriend, in front of your mother, in front of everyone we know." The woman beside him rolled her eyes so hard I caught it through the camera. "God," she muttered, and even through the tinny audio, it sounded like she was exhausted by the concept of me being a person. My husband looked past the camera and finally noticed the porch, the boxes. The rain had already come and gone, and the cardboard was warped, stained, sagging, some of the tape peeled loose, fabric poking out through the gaps. His face changed, not into sadness, but into fury. "What the hell is that?" he shouted. "Your things," I said. "You should probably grab them before the next storm." He started pacing, hands buried in his hair. "You did this on purpose," he said. "Yeah," I said, and it felt good to admit it. "I did." He slammed his fist against the door. "You can't keep me out of here," he yelled. "This is my house." "It's not," I said, keeping my voice level, because I refused to give him the satisfaction of hearing me shake. "It belongs to your mother, and I have a signed lease. You got written notice that your access was revoked. If you keep pounding on that door, I'm calling the police to report a disturbance." He froze, like his brain needed a second to catch up. Then he pulled out his phone and called his mother, right there on my porch, pacing back and forth like a kid running to tattle. I couldn't hear her side, but I could watch his expression fall through the stages. Confident, then confused, then angry, then smaller. He said, "What do you mean you signed a lease with her?" And then, "Are you serious right now?" And then, "You can't do this to me." And then finally, he went quiet, jaw clenched, just listening. The woman whispered something to him, probably telling him to calm down, but he was never built for calm. He kicked one of the boxes and it collapsed, spilling damp clothes across the porch. He kicked another. He started flinging things into the air like a tantrum was going to reverse the paperwork. A neighbor across the street stepped out onto his own porch, phone up. Not subtle, not threatening, just filming. My husband saw him and stopped mid-kick, chest heaving. The neighbor called out, "Time to go, man!" And the woman looked mortified, tugging at my husband's sleeve. Between my door camera and the neighbor's phone, the whole thing was already documented, so I didn't call the police. Public embarrassment was doing the job just fine, and I refused to hand him another version of events where he got to claim I overreacted. He glared at the little camera by the door like he wanted to put his fist through it. "You're enjoying this," he hissed. "I'm surviving it," I said, and my voice went a little softer, not because I felt sorry for him, but because the truth was heavy in my mouth. There's a difference between the two. He shoved the soggy things back into the broken boxes, muttering curses, while the woman stood with her arms crossed like she was waiting for an employee to finish loading her groceries. He crammed everything into the trunk, slammed it, and before getting in, he leaned toward the camera one last time. "This isn't over," he said. I looked at the screen. "It is for me," I said quietly, and ended the call. After that, my phone became a landfill of messages. Voicemails from him, from her, sometimes even from relatives who'd heard my side through the grapevine and decided their opinions were urgent. People love having opinions when they aren't the ones crying on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning. The woman left a voice message calling me petty, bitter, a witch. My husband left one where he tried to sound charming again, like he could still talk me into being reasonable, and then another where he sounded like he genuinely hated me. I blocked them both, more permanently this time. A week later, I changed my number entirely, because I was tired of flinching every time my phone lit up. The quiet that followed wasn't peace. It was numbness. I'd wake up, make coffee, stare at the wall, and then remember, oh right, my husband detonated our marriage in front of everyone and blamed me for the blast, and I'd feel sick all over again. Some days I barely ate. Other days I ate whatever was easiest just to keep my body moving. I cried when I had the energy, and I kept functioning when I didn't, because I had to. A few days later, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and did something I'd been circling since the night of the party, but kept avoiding because I didn't want to be the crazy ex. I wrote an email to his company's human resources department. I stared at the blank screen for a long time, typed a sentence, deleted it, typed it again, deleted it again. I kept thinking, if I send this, he'll say I'm vindictive. He'll tell everyone I tried to end his career out of spite. And then another part of me would answer, he ended his own career the moment he started sleeping with someone who reported directly to him. He just doesn't want the consequences. So I wrote it. I wrote that my husband had been involved in a relationship with a junior member of his own team. I wrote that they had brought it into our home and exposed it publicly in front of dozens of witnesses. I wrote the dates I knew, the events I remembered, the nights he'd come home late with excuses that now sounded painfully stupid. I kept it factual, not poetic, not dramatic, just clear. I hit send and immediately felt like I might throw up. For a week, nothing happened, and I spiraled. Then I heard, through that same grapevine everyone pretends they don't use, that he'd been placed on leave while they looked into it. They interviewed people, pulled schedules, asked about promotions and evaluations. And suddenly a whole pile of little quirks everyone had quietly noticed and ignored were being spoken out loud in a room with a door that closed. He denied it, of course. She played dumb, but the more they dug, the uglier it got. A coworker of his, someone who'd always been friendly at holiday parties, sent me a short, careful message that basically said, "They're really looking into it now." I sat staring at the screen, heart pounding, and I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, like I'd just lifted something enormous, and my arms were still shaking from it. Over the following weeks, more trickled in through the same network that had fed on my humiliation. Apparently, other people had complaints too. Apparently, the woman had been getting special treatment for months. The easier accounts, the better reviews, the flexible hours nobody else got. People had noticed. People had been quietly annoyed. They just hadn't had a reason to say it out loud until now. I hated that part, honestly. I hated that my private catastrophe became a convenient door for other people's grievances. But I also couldn't pretend it didn't matter, because favoritism at work isn't just annoying, it's genuinely unfair to everyone doing the job the honest way. And yes, I'm aware I sound like a teacher. It's still true. About 6 weeks after I sent the email, one of his coworkers texted me 2 words. He's out. My stomach dropped, not because I felt bad for him, but because I knew exactly what he'd do next. Sure enough, his mother called that evening and said he'd already screamed at her about being fired, like it was something that had been done to him, rather than the direct result of his own mess. He got let go, she told me. And he's trying to make it your fault, I whispered. He's going to blame me. His mother's voice went cold. Let him, she said. He needs someone to blame, because he can't stand the idea that he did this to himself. The divorce itself was its own slow nightmare. Not dramatic in a movie way, just exhausting in a paperwork way. I hired a lawyer because I wasn't about to be outmaneuvered by a man who'd already proven he'd happily rewrite reality when it suited him. He hired one too, and for a while it was like the lawyers were the ones actually married, sending emails, scheduling meetings, negotiating, while I sat on the couch feeling like a guest in my own life. He tried to make the slap into a huge thing, of course. He tried to rewrite the whole story publicly too, not in some dramatic scandal way, but in the quiet, everyday coward way, telling people we'd simply grown apart, that I'd become difficult, that the woman was just someone who understood him better. One of our friends, the one who always tries to stay neutral, called me and said, "He's telling people you two were unhappy for years." I almost laughed, because yes, we were unhappy, just not in the mutual, respectful way he was pretending. He was unhappy because I existed as a person with needs of my own. I was unhappy because I'd been shrinking for the better part of a decade. That phone call set something off in me, and I did a thing I regret. I unblocked him for a minute and sent a message. Not a calm one, not a mature one. Something like "stop lying about me," with a few extra words I won't repeat here because they were ugly. I hit send and my stomach dropped because I knew instantly I'd cracked the door back open. He replied within seconds, like he'd been sitting there waiting. "See," he wrote, "this is what I mean. You're out of control." I stared at the screen and felt this hot wave of shame, because he was right about one thing. In that exact moment, I was out of control. I was reactive. I was wounded. I wanted to bite back, and he used it precisely the way I'd known he would, as evidence that I was the real problem all along. I blocked him again and sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot, crying so hard my chest ached, because I hated that I'd handed him ammunition. When I told my lawyer, he didn't scold me, but he gave me that look, the "please stop doing that" look. "Don't communicate with him directly," he said. "Let everything go through counsel." And I nodded, wiping my face like a kid. We did one mediation session, the kind where you sit in a small room with a mediator who talks in the gentle, even voice of someone trying to break up a fight at a daycare. My ex showed up with the woman waiting out in the hallway, which felt like a deliberate insult. I saw her through the glass, and she smirked when she caught my eye, like she was proud to be part of a process that should have been between me and my husband alone. I wanted to storm out. I wanted to flip the table. Instead, I folded my hands and pretended I wasn't shaking. The mediator asked us to talk about our goals, and my ex said his goal was a fair split and moving forward peacefully. He said it in that calm, reasonable voice that would have sounded so convincing to anyone who hadn't watched him kiss his girlfriend in our doorway. I wanted to scream, peacefully, "You chose the least peaceful way a human being could possibly do this." But I didn't. I bit the inside of my cheek and let my lawyer talk. At one point, my ex suggested I really should move out of the house quickly for my own well-being, that it wasn't healthy for me to stay somewhere with so many bad memories. He framed it as concern, and for 1 second, I almost believed it, because that's exactly how manipulation works. It puts on a soft sweater and calls itself kindness. Then the lease came up, and his face tightened, and I remembered he didn't care about my health at all. He cared about access. The session ended with nothing resolved, because he wanted far more than he deserved, and I was far too angry to hand it to him. I walked out to my car and saw the woman leaning against the wall outside, checking her nails like she was bored. When she looked up, she mouthed something like, "Good luck," and the fake sweetness in it made me want to scream. I drove away, gripping the wheel too hard, shaking, and understood that there was going to be no quick, clean ending, just months of this. It never turned into actual charges over the slap, which sounds wild, but neither of them wanted the night of the party turned into a public record, with a dozen witnesses describing in detail exactly why his junior analyst had been at his birthday. I mean his promotion party, in the first place. His lawyer brought the slap up in a hearing the way someone points out a stain on your shirt. Look at this, and my stomach dropped, because I didn't want that one moment to define me. But then my lawyer calmly asked how many witnesses had been present that night, and the whole room shifted, because there were so many. So many people who had watched him kiss his mistress in front of his wife and his own mother. So many people who had heard him justify it out loud. So many people who could confirm the woman had provoked me in my own doorway. I hated that it came down to that, to witnesses, to proof, to strangers validating my own reality. But I also felt this grim gratitude that my humiliation had happened in front of a crowd. It meant he could never gaslight me alone in a quiet room. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I started going through our finances, because divorce forces you to stare at numbers you spent your whole marriage avoiding. It didn't feel like snooping. It felt like survival. During the financial disclosures, when my lawyer requested the full list of accounts and tax documents, something surfaced that I didn't recognize. A separate savings account under his name. Not a couple $100s. A lot. Tucked quietly away. All those years I thought we were being careful and responsible. All those times I was told we couldn't afford a vacation, couldn't afford dinners out, couldn't afford for me to go back to school. He'd been building himself a private cushion, and I'd been living on faith. I sat at the kitchen table with the papers spread out in front of me, and I started laughing, and then I started crying, and then I did both at once, like a person in a breakdown montage, except there was no music. Just me and the low hum of the refrigerator. When I confronted him through the lawyers, he acted offended, like I was accusing him of a crime. "I saved," he wrote, and I could hear his voice in it. Someone in this marriage had to be responsible. I wanted to scream, someone had to be responsible. And to him, that meant hoarding money, while I made our home comfortable and gave up my career. To him, responsible meant quietly funding his own escape. The whole thing took 7 months. 7 months of meetings, documents, waiting for court dates, waiting for him to respond, waiting for my own life to be allowed to restart. In the end, we settled. I got a portion of what he'd stashed away. I got one of the cars. I got a share of some property. It wasn't a fair trade for the years I'd handed over. Not even close, but it was something. It was enough to breathe without feeling like I was going under. The day it finalized, I sat in my car outside the courthouse and just stared out the windshield. I expected to feel free. Instead, I felt hollow, like I'd been holding my breath so long I'd forgotten how to actually fill my lungs. His mother squeezed my hand. "You did it," she said softly. I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "I did." A couple of weeks later, I took my first trip alone in more than a decade. Nothing glamorous. A small town on the coast, a cheap rental, the kind of place where you can walk outside and smell salt and pretend, for a minute, that your life isn't in pieces. I sat on the sand with a paperback I barely read and watched families splash in the water, and I felt this stab of grief because that could have been my life if he'd been a different kind of person, if I'd chosen differently, if any of it had been fair. But then I felt something else underneath the grief, this quiet, stubborn hope, because I was still here. I wasn't destroyed. I wasn't gone. I was just rearranged. When I got back, I did the unglamorous work of rebuilding. I updated my resume, which felt like introducing myself to a stranger who happened to be me. I took a part-time job at a small bookshop owned by a friend of a friend, mostly because I needed somewhere to be and something to feel useful for. I shelved books and helped customers and tried not to dwell on how I used to have much bigger plans. Humbling is an understatement. His mother stayed in my life, not as my mother-in-law anymore, technically, but as this fierce older woman who had chosen me when her own son didn't. We'd get coffee, talk about normal things, complain about the weather, complain about grocery prices, and then one of us would mention him and the room would go cold for a second. But we didn't pretend. That was the difference now. Neither of us pretended anymore. Months passed, and I landed a full-time job again. An office role that wasn't glamorous, but paid enough for me to feel steady. My days became routine. Wake up, coffee, commute, work, home, dinner, a show, bed. Normal, boring, healing. There were still moments that blindsided me. The first time I saw a man who looked like him in a coffee shop and my whole body went cold. The first time I heard a song in a grocery store that had been playing at our wedding, and I had to abandon my cart like it was cursed. Healing was never a straight line. It was more like being fine for 5 days and then falling apart because I couldn't find a specific mug. And suddenly it felt like I'd lost my whole life all over again. I also went through a stretch where I got obsessed with checking the woman's page online. Even though I knew it was poison. I'd unblock her, lurk, block her again, like I could control my own pain by staring straight at it. She posted vague little quotes about choosing happiness and protecting your peace. And every time I saw one, I wanted to throw my phone across the room. I hate admitting how much it got under my skin, but it did. Eventually, I deleted the app for a while, because I finally understood I was volunteering to be hurt. On a random Tuesday, I ran into my ex at a discount store. Not a dramatic run-in, just terrible timing in the aisle with the cleaning supplies. He looked thinner, tired, like reality had been loud in his ears for a while. He froze when he saw me, like he didn't know which version of me to brace for, the one who threw cake or the one who cried on the couch. My heart jumped, and then, strangely, I felt calm. He opened his mouth like he was about to say something, maybe an apology, maybe more blame, and I cut him off simply by walking away. No speech, no confrontation. I grabbed what I'd come for and left. In the car, my hands were shaking, but I also felt proud because I hadn't given him a scene. I hadn't given him access to my emotions. I just picked up my life and carried it out the door. And then one evening, at a friend's small gathering, I met someone. Not in a magical way, not in a movie way, just in a we kept ending up in the same conversation way. We talked, we laughed, he asked me questions that had nothing to do with my ex. I caught myself smiling without planning it, and it genuinely startled me. I didn't jump into anything. I didn't fully trust my own judgment anymore. But slowly, I let it become something. I let a person into my life without trying to force it into a particular shape. It was gentler than what I'd known, quieter. It didn't feel like a performance I had to keep up. Meanwhile, my ex and the woman stayed together, at least for a while. That part reached me through mutual acquaintances, through small-town gossip that travels like it has its own legs. People said she was struggling after being transferred to a different team, that no one really wanted to work with her, that she'd lost the shine she used to walk around with. People said my ex was in a lower position now, trying to rebuild after being fired, complaining about money, like he'd only just discovered that rent was a real thing. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't mourn it either. I just noticed it, like the universe slowly leveling something out. About a year after the party, almost exactly, his mother came over for coffee. She looked tired, but there was something amused in her eyes, like she was sitting on a story. He called me, she said. I tensed automatically. What now? She took a slow sip. He asked if he could rent this house from me, she said, and her mouth twitched. I blinked. The house? I repeated, because it sounded too ridiculous to be true. She nodded. He said he's struggling, said he needs somewhere stable, said he made mistakes, said he misses home. She snorted. Home. I felt my stomach twist, not with pity, but with this strange, clean anger, because of course he wanted the thing he'd thrown away. Of course he wanted the comfort he'd always treated as a given. What did you tell him? I asked, already knowing. His mother set her cup down and leaned forward. I told him no, she said. Simple as that. I told him I remember the way he walked into this house with her on his arm. I remember how he spoke to you. I remember how he spoke to me. I told him he can rebuild his life all he wants, but he's going to do it without using mine as a safety net. I let out a breath I hadn't known I'd been holding. Thank you, I said quietly. She waved her hand like she didn't want the gratitude. I'm not doing it for you, she said, but her eyes softened. I'm doing it because he needs to learn that love isn't a permission slip to hurt people and then come crawling back for comfort when it stops being fun. We sat in the kitchen and talked about normal things again after that. And since I know people always ask this part, no, I didn't stay in that house forever. I rented from his mother just long enough to get steady on my feet, then moved into my own small place closer to work. And the person I started seeing, we're taking it slow. That's all I can handle right now. And for once, I'm letting that be enough. I didn't feel dramatic about any of it. I didn't feel the need to make a speech. I just felt this quiet certainty, like a line had been drawn on the ground, and I was finally standing on the other side of it. Later that night, I stood in my own living room, and I thought about the room where people had once shouted surprise. How badly I'd wanted to make my husband feel celebrated, how I'd wanted him to finally feel like enough, and how he'd repaid all of it with the most public humiliation of my life. I thought about the part of me that had blamed myself for years, the part that had folded smaller and smaller to fit inside his expectations, and I felt this strange mix of sadness and relief. I won't tell you I forgave him because I didn't. I won't tell you I'm grateful it happened because I'm not. But I will tell you that I stopped trying to make sense of it in a way that let him off the hook. I stopped rewriting my own pain just to keep some fragile peace. And I stopped believing that loving someone means you have to let them break you to keep them. I went to bed that night in a place that was finally, fully mine. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I slept without waking up with my heart racing. Not because everything was perfect, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for him to come back and explain to me why I deserved what he did. I already knew the answer to that, and it was never about me.